Hello, this is Tracks of Our Queers. My name is Andy Gott, and each episode I'll talk to a guest about one song, one album, and one artist that have soundtracked their life as a queer person. Sui Zhen is a performance artist and musician based in Melbourne. Her experimental work examines the intersections of human life and technology, and how we exist in today's digital age. We recorded this episode over Zoom, and speaking of the intersection of human life and technology, you may occasionally hear the rumblings of a Melbourne tram in the distance. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a rating or review in your app, or even better, tell a friend. Tracks of Our Queers is an entirely independent production, so if you'd like to help keep the podcast ad-free, you can shop me a coffee via the link in the show notes. Every penny goes to episode production. Over to Sui Zhen. Sui Zhen, welcome to Tracks of Our Queers. I'd love to know straight off the bat, how did you find music when you were younger? Were you a seeker of music and culture, or were you more of an absorber?
Actually, to be honest, I think I was both, but I was an absorber because I didn't know that I could seek. So I just accepted what was presented to me, and from that I picked something that I probably related to. It took me a really long time to really switch over into someone who was seeking my own taste, and I think what it took was to develop taste, and I think that can take a long time, or some people might already have an inkling of that from a young age. But yeah, definitely just absorbing what was out there. And I had so many diverse influences and musical inputs. When you've got an older brother who's like a stoner, kind of into prog rock, and then also has like a gentle side to the music taste as well, it's like, whoa, and an older brother who will literally lock you in their room and until you listen to the whole Lenny Kravitz album. I don't even know what that was. I think that was when Lenny Kravitz turned the corner or something like that in his music. But then, I also played in primary school in a concert band, and I played cornet, a precursor to a trumpet. They give really little people who can't hold a saxophone, they give them miniature trumpets.
It's very cute.
Yeah. So I played that, and then I also was in the vocal ensemble. So I had these inputs that were really disconnected. My inputs in vocal stuff were also very led by the choir teacher, and she had diverse tastes, but she would teach us African choral kind of stuff, which was blowing my mind as a 8-year-old, but I didn't even know that my mind was being blown. And then starting to learn jazz music in a jazz band as well, all through school, and then being in school musical. So those kinds of musical kind of music, really camp, over the top kind of music too, that I loved as well. So it's just so confusing. And then Alanis Morissette and so it's kind of crazy. And I think the first time I sought music out was after going to an IMAX. There was an IMAX theater in Darling Harbour, and IMAX, for those who don't know, is a huge screen. I don't even know if that's that impressive anymore with all the screens that we have, but it was at the time. And I went and saw documentaries there, including a documentary about somewhere in Africa where there's lots of animals, a very typical documentary, but the music really struck me. I was like, I love this music. And that's when I went to the Australian Geographic shop and bought some CDs for myself. I can remember the first pieces of music that I bought, and people would call them New Age now, but didn't know that.
I love imagining you just walking into the National Geographic gift shop and being like, I've just got to get this CD, something in this music spoke to me. I relate to that. Yeah.
And in that same era, I bought an Ace of Base cassette tape, and my mum was like, oh, what is that about? But then, and Jagged Little Pill, Alanis Morissette.
Yeah.
Enough about me. Let's talk about you for a minute. Enough about you. Let's talk about life for a while.
I think we should talk about Alanis, because Alanis is not one of your 3 selections today. But a couple of years ago, you covered All I Really Want is that from the Jagged Little Pill album?
It sure is, Andy.
Yeah,
sure is.
Yeah. And I love what you wrote about it. You talk about how Alanis made you and others feel like they could experience a different type of womanhood. And I think there's many reasons why Alanis definitely speaks to many different types of queer people.
Yeah, I think so as well. And one of those formative influences that you just absorb as well. Her lyrics, I learnt them all off that album, and I sang them, all of the songs, with my best mate who I'm still friends with, who we went through kindergarten and high school together too. And she and I would go down to the bush track near our house, and there was like this little rocky part. It wasn't quite little. It's quite a large kind of, almost like, nature's amphitheater kind of vibe. And there's a loud stream, so no one could hear you no matter how loud you shouted or sung. And we would sing Alanis Morissette's songs together really loudly, like as loud as we could. She was really good at getting all of the intonation and the kind of like, like like that stuff. And like I was more focused on the kind of the jumps in the and I am I was like really into that kind of thing. And so basically, yeah. So I think vocally as well, like lyrically, vocally, and goes hand in hand with the teen angst that you're experiencing all these emotions, and Alanis is there kind of expressing them, relating to much more adult experiences, but she's like showing you that it's okay to say this stuff, and dressing in a flannelette shirt or whatever she was doing that was subversive at the time. Yeah.
You're not going to believe this, but this is not the first conversation I've had about Ace of Base and flannelette shirts today. Today's been a particularly queer day. So you came to a realization about your queerness in more recent years, if that's fair to say. I'd love to know, did your art and the music that you create change in any way?
I don't know if it changed, to be honest. I think I felt more at home in it, and I just leant into it more. But when you were asking that question, I was preemptively thinking you were going to say, did my audience change? But actually, I felt like, and then it got me just quickly thinking about audience and who the people who show up at your shows. And I feel like the people who were showing up at my shows were always queer. And I just really didn't recognize that was the community I was most welcome within. And that was from the beginning of my making music. And I feel quite naive looking back that I only played like lesbian shows in uni. Like I only got invited to play like besides opening for my brother's prog rock band, I got invited. People didn't know where to place me because like, here's a Eurasian person making kind of folky pop music. I didn't see myself in music that often at that time. Like in Sydney at that time in the early mid-2000s, there wasn't a huge amount of Asian female electronic pop kind of musicians that I could really see as role models, or even engineers or producers or anything like that. But yeah, the people that most welcomed me it's in the queer community, and I look back, I'm like, oh my God. And so it's, the reason why I didn't really, God, so many layers and intersectional identity stuff within that about Asianness as well. So I always identified more heavily on that side, not really questioning sexuality that much. It wasn't really something that felt urgent to me, but figuring out where I fit in on the race kind of side of things, being half of something, that was more present in my formative years. It's like, where do I belong?
Before we get into the music, my last question would be, you're a parent and you're also in a heterosexual relationship. And while we know that those facts exist separately from identifying as queer, have you ever had to navigate that in a conversation with people who have maybe struggled to piece those parts together?
Melbourne is such a bubble, I gotta say. People are very accepting and understanding here, and the amount of particularly like clean-born women, who have wombs and can carry children, who have hetero relationship dynamics. I guess it's more like their companionship is with, they want to raise a family and they fall into this heterosexual relationship at that particular time, but they also identify as queer. I know like so many people like that. So that's kind of, it just felt normal to me. And I've known people to kind of experiment in those dynamics in terms of having, just different approaches to family. And for me, I fell into this relationship at a time when I was also just like realizing that I was queer, like properly. And so it's really bizarre. When my mum passed away, she got sick and she passed away, and I had a new relationship at that point. And I guess that relationship might have just fallen away and my focus been on family. But I had a partner who was just so supportive and was just continually showing up emotionally, and that the relationship just kept going. And, we both entered the relationship without really feeling like it was, because I had said, oh, I've just realized this is probably, and it just kept going. And then I guess with illness in the family, it changes whatever is going on in your life. And it's interesting. I felt like there's ways to explore a queer identity even within that dynamic too. I noticed that every time I needed to, I felt repressed or needed to express something, I could still do that in my relationship. We just are, and that's also probably why I'm, I've had 2 children and raising one, and basically, I don't think that I'll get married necessarily, but that's probably a part of this like queer identity thing. I call my relationship more of a companionship. That's what it is. It's just like having someone who allows you to ask questions about yourself and explore those questions, even if that's just theoretically even. And it just means that you have this longevity in a relationship. But I felt like I've been in heterodynamics before where I wouldn't even be able to say the person wasn't right, wasn't the right thing. And yeah, it's constant negotiation, I think, with each other, and just
I love that. So onto the music. What was the track you picked and why?
Oh, so the track that I picked is kind of like is it even a track? Like it's it's a kind of piece of music that is it a piece of music? It's got a lot of spoken word.
I wanted you. And I was looking for you.
It's Walking and Falling by Laurie Anderson. And I felt like Laurie Anderson has always been of a creative anchor for me to think about her career and how she's approached her work with grace, seriousness, and a lot of dedication. Presents really patient in interviews and articulate, and kept doing her thing all this time and pioneering a lot of electronic experimental forms of music, making her own instruments. But I felt like she's also, because she's so lyrical or poetic in the way she approaches the language used in her songs. Yeah, it sits in this interesting terrain for me, but it's totally influenced me so much. Like I have to, like in terms of listening to my music and hearing the influence, I feel like the spoken word in my next release that I'm working on is finally there. It's finally kind of hitting into my music, even though I've been influenced by her for a long time. So this track, I also like it as just, it's like a simple way to view life sometimes, that you're always walking and you're always falling at the same time. The lyrics, if you look at them, it's just this clever little observation.
You're walking, and you don't always realize it.
But I do feel like that
You're always
way about
falling.
my artistic career and also just
Each step,
life. Like you don't realize it, but you're always kind of moving forward, but you might also be experiencing all these other things as well. In my instance, I've had a rough few years and had some big tragedies in there, but then I look back and I've still been living a full life somehow, even amongst all of that. I like the openness of the track, the question that it asks, and what it makes people maybe reflect about their own state of being.
I loved this track. Thank you for sharing, because I knew, of course, well, not of course, I'm not going to say obviously, because Laurie Anderson is not obvious and she's not of course. She's had these anomalies in her career. So the track that, if anyone knows a Laurie Anderson track, it will usually be Oh Superman, which is from the same album as the song that you picked.
Oh, Superman. Oh, John.
And that for some reason, went to number 2 in the UK in 1981.
So
So a
bizarre.
lot of people loved and enjoyed that song to get it to number 2. But listening to it to this day, it really still is like nothing else that's out there. And, well, you know, many artists, including yourself, have been influenced by her, but it's still incredibly esoteric and unusual. But something in that track, and likely also this album, spoke to people. It connected with people who might not typically have listened to that kind of music. So I've always been fascinated by what is it in Laurie Anderson's work, which is so far from the mainstream, but does tap into something in us where we're curious and we want to listen to more.
Part of it for me, I feel, would be the like proto ASMR vibe about her music, like where she's speaking falls into a rhythm. It's calming, but then there's still this music and there's still this like kind of wild elements. The track is really long too, and I think her spoken voice is really pleasant to listen to. And sometimes
it was completely hypnotic
Yes,
and mesmerizing.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, hello, I'm right here. Of course, it's like a structured written piece, but it also feels quite stream of consciousness. And then, yeah, I guess it's unusual. It has the right amount of quirk and it's accessible. Like, I think when she does that kind of revoicing of like an answering machine kind of thing, I think those little weird references to everyday life speak to people. But as to how it got number 2, I don't even know. Like, it's so cool that
It was championed by a guy called John Peel, who was a really influential radio DJ, like very much a tastemaker. So there is a why, but it takes more than a radio DJ tastemaker to get things to number 2. And there's probably various queer aspects to Laurie Anderson as an artist, and maybe even in her personal life. But she was married to Lou Reed, who is who was a queer man and a queer icon. So I found that interesting as well.
that's what I was going to say about queerness as well. It's like sometimes some people just don't wish to outwardly express how they identify, and so yeah, you just never know. Like you might see people who appear as like a heterodynamic, but who knows how each of them identify within themselves. But also, yeah, in terms of Laurie Anderson as a queer icon, and you know, just image wise, often wearing a suit and you know, masculine kind of attire, but also remaining soft in her presence, and she's not someone who wishes to fit in or conform into any preconceived notion of whatever box you want to try and put her in. And yeah, the relationship with the Reed is also, yeah, it intrigues me, and I feel like it's really, from the outside, it felt like it would have been a very beautiful companionship for their later years. And I actually got to see her live in Tasmania at Dark Mofo Festival.
Wow, I'm very jealous.
Yeah, and it was like the title of All the Things Lost in the Flood, or something after the flood. Like, it was her grieving, like it was totally her grief output. And I got the book and everything, and that's why she remains special to me, because she's an artist who I can relate to in grief as well. And that was the year that my mum had passed away that I got to see her. So it was so special. I'm pretty sure I cried multiple times just at seeing her, but also at how much she was speaking to me, and that I'm like, you were speaking to me about the grief of losing your later life companion, because they found each other later in life, and then also in terms of grieving an archive of materials that were lost. Like, yeah, I was just such a special artist for me to see, and that kind of, you know, there might have been others, once shifting stands, like other artists that I would cite as like big influences, but that really knocked others off the podium. She remained at the top, my anchor, who I would think, what would Laurie Anderson, how would she approach this if I'm having an artistic conundrum, or you know, my integrity's being questioned in, you know, by some kind of thing. I'd be like, what will she do? There's no way that, you know, I got to do it this way.
I think that's a wonderful northern star to look toward as an artist.
Yeah.
A few months ago, I heard her interview as part of Anderson Cooper's podcast about grief, and he interviewed her, and she talked about this archive that you mentioned of belongings and giving, kind of lose things away to people as a way of moving through the grief. And it's this funny moment where she describes kind of seeing a friend walking down the street wearing like Lou's jacket that she gave to the friend, but seeing it that day and thinking, no, I want that back, and like trying to get the jacket off the friend's back, but it's like you gave them the jacket, you know. Anyway, very, very interesting discussion on grief. What album did you pick? And I'd love to know why.
At the moment, as a parent, and I'm parenting after loss as well, having lost our first baby, and now we're parenting after that loss. So there's a lot of grief associated with how I've come into parenting, but also what comes up a lot is grieving my mother. And so I always like to include her somehow, you know, in whatever opportunity I get in my life. And the song is not on this album, but this album is the one that I remember more songs from. I've got a really clear memory of Walking on Broken Glass by Annie Lennox, but then very tender associations with Medusa and all the covers, just like in terms of we included a Wider Shade of Pale cover on as one of my mum's funeral songs. She really loved Annie Lennox. I don't really think of my mum so much as a musical person in the sense that she was feeding me music and, you know, but I think the music I did absorb, there was a lot of Annie Lennox from her and a lot of that Medusa album.
And so it was later.
And we listened to a lot of it when she was sick and when I was caring for her. It's just a very tender, kind of special album, but as an artist, what I take from it is sometimes you can sing about really sad things, but the song, to be very simple and basic about it, can sound happy or freeing, you know, but the content or the inspiration for it is actually some kind of tragedy or something like that. And even before any really big tragic things that happened in my adult life, I found like I was always writing songs that was about sad things but sounded a bit lighter. And I don't know where that comes from. That's just like a balance I like to hit with a lot of the music I make or anything, like that it's got the right amount of dark shades, and as well, I guess it's just things having weight and meaning. So Medusa, yeah, I can't like really listen to it easily without having that emotion all well up, but I love also that as well. I love leaning into that emotion sometimes. And I felt like the strength of the production and the quality of Annie Lennox's voice really carries me through my own grieving experience when I'm re-listening to that stuff, and also watching her video clips. They're all really incredible. Like, so yeah, it's like a really special album.
There's so many parts of this that I love. I love the connection to your mum. I love your mum listening to Annie Lennox. I love, you know, Annie Lennox is queer in a way. Her visuals, like you mentioned, when they first came out, the Eurythmics in the early 80s, presenting very masculine and butch in a way which was highly unusual for chart-topping pop stars. And the quality of the music, her voice, it's hard to not enjoy Annie Lennox's voice. What I find interesting is when you pick this album, that the album before this, which like you mentioned, Walking on Broken Glass came from, is all her own material. She wrote every song on that album. Yeah, this album is all covers.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting how she was at the height of her solo career's kind of commercial and artistic zenith, and then decided to make an album of covers. I mean, thank you, because the album that we got was amazing, but it was apparently savaged by critics. Critics savaged it. But it's interesting that you have noted in your work all along that kind of melancholic quality. I think it's a universal theme as well, but that balance between happy and sad. And there's that cover she does of Downtown Lights, which I think is by a Scottish band called the Blue Nile or something.
It's all right.
That is just very much driving around on a moody evening, feeling morose, but also a bit sexy.
Yeah. Yes, definitely the androgyny of how she presented in the Eurythmics as well. On that Walking on Broken Glass song, a very vivid memory, and it must have been my mum playing it very loudly, getting something out of it, her own kind of music therapy, I guess, because she would have gone through a divorce with my dad at that point, and I was a young child. So like, and I looked at the lyrics before this podcast. I was just like, what, just checking the lyrics again. And I was like, of course my mum related to this song. It was an outlet for her to express that. And I remember her encouraging me to jump around when we played it really loudly. And I vaguely remember Christmas lights. Maybe they weren't, but I just remember lights, like cool lights. And like, I was like, yeah, I feel it. Like encouraging me to feel this thing, which I feel like is a rare, special memory. Because like in my mum's later life, I mean, she wasn't a straight up fan of my music. Let's just say that. But when she did attend, like she kind of didn't get. She was always calling me, "You're too intellectual about certain things." Like, and like, I think that's again like a queer kind of like a queer thing. Like it's like you're thinking too much about this. But I'm like, because I never felt like I fit in anywhere. Or I was very sensitive to the ambience of a space and being like, oh, look at the wrong radio station, don't they? And or they got the wrong color seats. I was always so specific and about vibe, and she found
you were tuned into a different frequency to most people.
Yeah. And something I felt like important to talk about too was that, like, I mean, my mom, I will never know, but I sometimes wonder if there was some queerness about my mom sometimes, but like I'll never know. Different generation, very different cultural upbringing, but I definitely didn't feel able to be open about it. It wasn't a huge deal. Like I don't feel like I was incredibly repressed. I had a really great, aspects of my childhood were difficult coming from like a broken family situation, but in terms of my mom and my relationship, I had a very, very loving, warm, encouraging, do what makes you happy relationship with my mom. Like she would always say that, and encouraging my music career. But I definitely felt like there was some shame associated with me coming out in a different way earlier, because just those inklings of just really basic feminist stuff, to like not wanting to shave legs or hair or cut my hair this way, or not wanting to wear fitted clothing because I didn't want to attract that kind of attention. I've always felt like that. I felt very different to my sister, basically, and we knew that we were different, and my sister always knew that I wouldn't like certain it was just like fashion is a real reflection, I think, of early queerness too, like when you don't feel like you want to wear the dress if you're raised as a girl or something like that, and you have, why do I feel weird about this? It just doesn't feel right. So I think like that is part of the reason, like it was such a formative time after my mum passed away, like all letting go, and then I can finally say this now, but it's just also that's some kind of quiet Asian Chinese culture thing in the background where there are parts of things are very different now, but there was a lot of not great modeling, I would say, for different sexualities, I guess.
We're on to your artist now, and I had not heard of this artist at all, so I am really keen to know why you picked them.
So the artist I chose, I really like to mention this artist whenever I get the opportunity to kind of share their work. It's Pablo's Eye, and they are released on a label called Stroom. And Stroom, Pablo's Eye, I kind of found, and I just like, I'm stuck on that group. Like it's a collective. The music sometimes feels like without form, like formless, but there's definitely a form to it. It feels very stream of consciousness. It's sometimes got like percussive or electronic rhythmic elements, and then sometimes spoken words, sometimes lyrics or words in a different language. Very much the product of a collective of different types of artists. Sometimes there are like synthesizer-y kind of drone type aspects in the background, building textures on top of other kind of stuff that it feels organic to me. Like the music feels like a reflection of some kind of natural environments too, or there's definitely a human element in there too.
Belleza absoluta en tu cuerpo tan frágil. Vivir en tus ojos.
I like krautrock, and I like music that is like long, repetitive, And to play, it's really fun because you get into a kind of trance, you play it and kind of different each time. And Pablo's Eye definitely, yeah, there's something almost mystical about some of the pieces. And I think there's a song called Double Language, and it just gets me thinking, you know, and I feel comforted because when I'm working as a DJ, performing as a DJ, I'd like to say I'm trying to find stuff that sounds like what I hear in my head or whatever, and Pablo's Eye is kind of what I hear in my head.
Is there any connection at all between Pablo's Eye and your relationship with the music with, you know, your identity as a queer artist yourself?
Yeah, I think because I can't, like, you know, I was just trying to describe it and define it, just I can't really easily do that. You know, it doesn't really fit into categories in terms of like as a queer identity. Is it like non-binary, or it's, you know, it's not, it's kind of like not this or that. It just is what it sounds like, and I guess in that sense it's the product of whoever's making it at the time. Like, I've read about the band existing in the 80s or whatever, but then I've seen some more contemporary videos on YouTube or recordings of performances, and it's a different set of musicians, you know, like, or that I'd seen before, or seeing elements thrown together. And yeah, it's just like, I guess it doesn't conform, you know, and that's something that I think is a big part of like queerness, is like, don't feel pressured to conform into any kind of one box or anything. And if you like that, you like that, and that's just what you like, you know. Don't feel like you need to, you know, that's how taste develops. It's when you're okay just with being the only one that likes something or being called weird all the time. God, I grew up being called weird a lot, but then a curveball was when my only Chinese friend in primary school called me boring. I was like, wow, so weird.
What would you rather be, weird or boring?
Well, you know why she called me boring? It was when we reconnected after primary school, and lucky I'm not naming any names. She was in an Asian gang. Sorry, I don't know why I had to say Asian gang, but it was like there's these gangs going around at the time, like really not cool, like, you know, like scary kind of stuff. And that's why she called me boring, because I was very safe into my little music. She's like, you're always doing your little music stuff. You should really join a gang. And I'm like, nah, just, you know, I'm happy.
What is going on? I did not see the conversation taking this turn. You being called boring because you hadn't joined an Asian gang.
Yes. And the North Shore train lines. Anyway, that's a whole story I've never really... I remember because this particular friend, I remember her scolding me once for, like, you know, pocketing. She had all these little cute stationery things, and I pocketed her Snoopy stationery because she had so many, and I was like, she didn't need this. Anyway, it was also my lesson about not stealing, but she scolded me and then later went on to join an Asian gang. So there you go.
We can explore that more in my spin-off podcast where we talk about the things that we stole and the lessons that we learned from that.
Oh my God, I love that.
But for now, thank you very much for sharing those choices. That was wonderful. And just to wrap up, is there a charity or initiative or social media account that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Yeah, so the charity I'd love to give a shout out to is Red Nose, an organisation who provides resources and support and counselling for bereaved parents and families. So people who have suffered the incredible, unfathomable loss of a child. And I have lots of gratitude for Red Nose existing in my life.
Well, Sui Zhen, you are queer, and thank you very much for your tracks.
I love being a part of this podcast. Thanks for giving me interesting things to think about.
You can find out more about Sui Zhen and her work in this episode's show notes. You can follow her on Instagram at @Sui_Chen. This episode was recorded on Wurundjeri and Ngarigo land, and I acknowledge sovereignty was never ceded. Tracks of Our Queers is produced, presented and edited by me, Andy Gott. A huge thank you to Anthony Garvin and Forbes Street Studios. You can email me at tracksofourqueers@gmail.com. Follow the podcast at @tracksofourqueers on social media. And if you're not already, of course, do subscribe. See you next time.